The recording is about to begin. Okay. So welcome everybody to Torah study for the Parsha, the weekly Torah portion. We're on page 1140 in the Eitz Chaim Chumash. This is the Torah portion Ki Tavo, and it begins in Deuteronomy at chapter 26, right at the beginning of the chapter. So not too far, not too hard to find. And this is actually the last Torah portion of any serious length in the Torah. The rest of the Torah portions that we will have to conclude the book of Deuteronomy are all pretty small. There's another 4 Torah portions, but altogether they're just a few pages each, actually. And if we're at page, we're at chapter 26. Ki Tavo is going to end at the end of chapter 28, no, in the beginning already of chapter 29, and all of Deuteronomy in the end is then going to be just another 5 chapters. Chapter 34 is the last chapter. So, and that's 4 Torah reading, 4 different parshiot. Nitzavim and Vayelech and Hazinu and V'zot HaBracha. So Ki Tavo is the last lengthy or substantially long Torah portion, and it has a number of sections to it. The first section is what's called Parashat Bikurim, the section having to do with bringing first fruits. The idea being that the farmer has harvested their crop, and harvesting is always a tricky thing. Will the weather cooperate? Will the harvest be abundant? So the first fruits of the harvest go to God in a symbolic way, and we have at the very beginning of the Torah reading the ceremony that the farmer has to undertake with bringing the first fruits, and it has the first prayer, a rare occurrence when you think about it. It's a little strange, considering how central prayer is to our idea of religious practice, and people are praying in the Torah all over the place, yet the Torah never tells us that we must pray. It never tells us explicitly that you have to pray. The rabbis interpreted verses in that regard, but the Torah never actually says you must pray to God. So here is the first time the Torah tells us you must recite these words to God. So, which means that it's a prayer. So that's the first thing that the Torah portion opens up with. Then it has another section which tells people about another prayer, another recitation that they have to say, and this is called Vidui Ma'asrot, the confession or the acknowledgement about giving all of the tithes. And this is a prayer that's not recited once a year, it's recited once every 3 years, because that's the cycle of all the tithes that you have to give, 10% of your produce. It goes in different years, it goes to different causes. We not have to go into that right now. But the point is, after you finish the 3-year cycle, you pray to God and you say, okay, I've fulfilled my commandment, my obligation to you, what you have commanded, and I've given every single maaser exactly the way I was supposed to. I treated it the right way. So please, God, be good to us as we go forward. So that's the next section. And then what we have for the rest of it, in one way or another, is exhortations to keep God's commandments and be faithful to God, with the major section. And so that's then in a general way. And then we have a ceremony that happened once, and the ceremony is the ceremony of setting up stones. When you enter the land, you set up these big, gigantic stones, and you write the entire Torah on it, and so that it will be a monument to our steadfast connection to God and our commitment to fulfilling God's commandments. It's written in stone, and that's very important. And then we have another one-time ceremony. Now I'm already on like 1146, 1147, which is blessings and curses, and that introduces the final theme of the Torah reading. First, we have actually this very theatrical, dramatic recitation where the people are placed on two facing mountain slopes, and the priests and the Levites are down in the valley, and they call out blessings and curses. Blessings for everybody that's doing the right thing, and curses for anybody that does the wrong thing. And the whole people have to keep on after each of these blessings and curses. They have to say Amen, 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 Amen. And this is a very, like I said, theatrical way of getting the people to affirm their commitment. And then the last part of the Torah reading, and the most extensive part, it goes from 1148 through 1156, 57, something like that, is what is the blessings and the curses, and most of it is curses. 1159. So it's a bunch of pages. If you listen to God's words, then you'll have blessings. If you betray God's words, then you'll have horrific curses that will rain down upon you. And that's called the tochacha, the admonition. It's a repeat of a similar set of horrible pictures that are painted in the Torah for what happens if you betray God, that we find in Bechukotai, in Leviticus. So and that's basically at the end. And the idea is, okay, so can you please get the message? This is it's not rocket science. It's better for you to follow God's words. Believe me. That's what basically Moses says. So that's the overall flow of the Torah portion. So, invitation, as always. Is there a particular part of this Torah reading that people want to zero in on? Going one.
Well, I just have a quick question. I don't know if it's
Go ahead.
I don't know if it's a deep dive or not, but I was at a Shiva Minyan on Zoom last night, and my brother-in-law's father had passed, and my brother-in-law gave a Devar Torah in his name, obviously about this parsha.
Very beautiful.
And
good.
what he said, he brought particular attention to the wicker baskets. So his Devar Torah was regarding that you were supposed to bring your offerings in silver and gold, but then if you were poor, you had to bring them in a wicker basket, and that if they were silver and gold, you were to take them home with you, but if it was a wicker basket, you had to leave the basket. And I didn't read that in this. Did I skip something?
No, you didn't skip anything. That's not in the text at all. It says a basket. It says a basket. And we have descriptions about the practices during the late Second Temple time of how people brought the bikurim. It's actually a very beautiful description. Now, since you brought it up, and I love that little section, and I've shared it before, but I'm going to share it again. So hold on one second. So just give me a half a second to get to it. And Right. This is the description that the Mishnah gives us. It's chapter 3 of Tractate Bikurim, which means first fruits. And it reads like this. How do landowners separate first fruits from the rest of their produce? When a man goes down to his field and sees a fig that has begun to ripen, or a grape cluster that has begun to ripen, or a pomegranate that has begun to ripen, he binds it with a reed. So he takes a little piece of a straw or something, and he ties a yellow ribbon around the cluster, around that branch that's holding that particular fruit. Right? All the other fruit is still ripening, but it hasn't ripened as fast. So this is the first one he notices, right? And that's anybody that has a garden knows that this is something that the gardeners or the farmers are looking all the time. How's it going? Is everything okay? Are there any bugs that are messing things up? Oh, and then you find there's always some few fruits that ripen first. So you tie a ribbon around that branch or around that little stem, because you're not going to pick it yet. You're going to pick it when everything gets picked. But now now you have a symbol, a sign that tells you that that's the first fruits. He binds it with a reed and says, these are the first fruits. So he identifies them and assigns them to be the first fruits, right? So now they are the fruits that he is obligated to bring to the temple. Okay. How do they bring the first fruits up to the temple? The inhabitants of all the towns in the priestly course gather in the main town of the priestly course. So in other words, that this is all different kinds of groups. When we learn Ta'anit, we learned that there are different communities that ended up being part of different shifts in the temple and identifying with them. If they were priests, they were on duty. If they were the Israelites and the Levites, they were synchronized with them. They sleep outside in the open area of the town. So in other words, there's a town that usually is the place where farmers go in to buy their supplies and so on and so forth. So all of the farmers are coming in from their farms, from their fields, and they collect in their local central town, and they all get there, and that night they do a sleepover in the town square. One second here. Good. Hello, Meryl. Hello, Geraldine. And they would not enter the houses in the town for fear of contracting corpse uncleanness. They had to go to the temple, so they had to keep on themselves ritually pure. So they would stay outside, and they wouldn't go into anybody's house. For if God forbid there was somebody who had passed away in the house, they would become ritually impure. So this way, they stayed ritually pure, and they were able to go to the temple. At dawn, the official would say, "Arise and let us go up to Zion, to the house of the eternal, our Almighty God." So this is a verse from Jeremiah. Kumu v'na letzio. So he's like the town crier. He wakes everybody up, and everybody starts getting ready. Those who come from nearby bring figs and grapes. Those who come from afar bring dried figs and raisins. So in other words, if you can get to Jerusalem soon enough so that your first fruits can stay fresh, then you bring the fresh fruits. But if you're coming from far away and it's going to take you a couple of days to get there, by the time you get there, it's all going to be shriveled and dried up. So you know what? Dry them first. Dry them and preserve them, and bring them to Jerusalem as dried fruits. And an ox walks before them. Okay, so there's a procession. Remember, there are a whole bunch of farmers in a particular town, and they're all going up together. And this parade is led by an ox, its horns overlaid with gold. So here's where we get to the embellishments, right? So they would gold plate the horns of the ox to make it look really, really fancy, and a wreath of olive leaves on its head. And it would get, a crown of olive leaves. We're familiar with these kinds of crowns from what context? Anybody?
I just think Roman.
Yeah, Roman Caesars.
Yeah.
This is like royalty. This is like when you were chosen to be the next Caesar, you were given one of these crowns. Or I think if you won, an Olympics race, you were given a laurel, right? So this is taking this ox and making the ox into this, VIP kind of thing. A flutist plays before them until they arrive near Jerusalem. So they're marching from the countryside, from all over the countryside, from every direction. All the roads are getting filled with people from all parts of the land, and different locations. Obviously, some are going to be a little bit more elaborate, and some less. But the way you might think about it, what kinds of images can we conjure up of these kinds of like mass parades that are joyous, celebratory kinds of processions? Anybody? Come on. What kinds of things have we seen in the movies or in our travels or wherever?
I keep thinking of Mardi Gras.
Absolutely. I think that's a perfect analogy. Yes. It's like when they do these, like, yes, these bands of music and everybody's in costumes and everybody's very, very upbeat. I was in New Orleans a few years back, and they have these like jazz parades, and people, just like march along, and they've got also animals going, and everybody's, dressed to kill with all kinds of stuff. So here we have this, that kind of, it's not described in such an elaborate way, but that's the spirit that we have to really imagine of what's going on. There's a really uplifted sense of celebration, of partying, of exhilaration. Music is going on, and it's a mass movement. Even though the Torah really speaks about an individual only, it says, you, individual farmer, this is what your obligation is. It became this mass celebration. Once they arrived near Jerusalem, they sent a messenger ahead to announce their arrival, and they decorated their first fruits. So now they're getting ready to put on a show. Yes, David.
How about when we say the Hoshanot over Sukkot? Is it something like that?
Well, that's a procession inside the synagogue, and that is echoed in ceremonies that took place inside the temple. People walked around the temple with their lulav and etrog, and that's where we continue that custom. This is, a national outdoor days and days and days of marching. It's like the March to Washington kind of thing. It's like people, stopping everything and moving on toward the national center. Okay, so they decorated the first fruits. The high officers, the chiefs, the treasurer of the temple came out to meet them. According to the rank of the entrance, they would determine which of these officials would go out. So if it's from Montclair, then a very high official goes out to greet us. If it's from, West Orange, then, they send, the assistant high official, but they're welcoming them, to the city. And all the craftsmen of Jerusalem stand before them and greet them, saying, brothers, men of such and such a place, you have come in peace. So this is, again, they're entering the city and they're marching through the streets of Jerusalem to get to the temple. And as they pass through market streets, and all of the store owners stop what they're doing, go to their front door, and greet these tourists who are just like they do in New York, and say, Baruch haba, you may you come in peace, right? Boachem l'shalom, like we say on Friday night to the angels. A flutist plays before them until they reach the Temple Mount. Once they reach the Temple Mount, even Agrippa the king puts the basket of first fruits on his shoulder and enters and goes forth until he reaches the temple court. So it doesn't matter how high your status is, you can't let somebody else do this for you. You do it yourself. Right? Once he reached the temple court, the Levites sang the song, I will extol you, O Lord, for you have drawn me up, Aramimcha Hashem ki diritani v'lo simachto evayli, and you have not let my foes rejoice over me. Psalm 30. Okay, and then they put pigeons on top of the basket to be sacrificed as burnt offerings, but the pigeons which are in their hands are given as a gift to the priests. The basket stays on his shoulder, and he recites the entire confession of the first fruits, beginning with verse 3 in our Torah reading. I declare this day to the Lord your God, etc., etc., and then, etc., etc., etc. Then he takes the basket down and holds it by its rim, and the priest puts his hand beneath the basket and waves it before the altar. Then the Israelite recites the second part of the confession, beginning with the words, a wandering Aramean, Aramea Oved Avi, and continues and finishes the rest of the passage. So that's starting from verse 6. Then he places the basket beside the altar, and he bows down and departs. Right. So the basket is a generic basket. It doesn't say what kind of basket it has to be. However, now we get into some details. So this being such a popular ritual, since there was an agrarian society, so many farmers, so it applied to masses and masses of people. So then we have this question. The Torah mandates that each person say this prayer. What if you don't know the prayer? How do you say the prayer if you haven't been educated, if you haven't studied the prayer, if you really don't, maybe you're illiterate? What do you do then? And you can't read the prayer out. So we think about our own struggles with connecting to the tradition. Here it is 2,000 years ago, and they have to address this question. At first, the law specified that anyone who knows how to read should recite the passage. But anyone who does not know how to read, the priests lead them through the reading. So the priests would read it slowly, and they would then read it themselves. When the sages saw that those who could not read refrained from bringing the first fruits to the temple, it became a turnoff. People were embarrassed. People said, this is too hard for me. They ordained that the priests would lead through the reading, both for those who know and for those who do not know. So then you couldn't tell. It became universal, right? And this is a move that the rabbis made in a number of places. What's the famous place is shrouds, right? When people got embarrassed because people that could afford shrouds that were very fancy, they would, spend a lot of money on coffins, on shrouds, the whole funeral industry that we have even to this day. When the rabbis saw that the poor people were getting embarrassed and humiliated because they couldn't keep up with this kind of, consumerist competition, then that's when they decreed everybody gets buried the same way. The coffin should be the same. Of course, unfortunately, today, nobody listens to that anymore. But their decree was to save face for those people who could not afford it. So here it's a question of saving face for people who were not as educated. We're not going to make it, okay, if you're educated, you can do it. if you're not educated, we'll help you. So that's a very nice, generous gesture, but it ends up still discriminating between the person who is more competent and the person who isn't. So people started getting upset with that. We have a similar approach now with Torah reading. In the old days, people that were called up for an aliyah, they were called up to read the Torah. So each person who was called up, it was their job to read that part of the Torah that they were called up for. But then when they saw that people that were not that comfortable with it, that weren't so fluent, were avoiding the Torah service, that's when they appointed a Torah reader to be the Torah reader for everybody. Right? And then you can't tell whether the person that's coming up there is the most fluent Torah reader in the world, because they're not reading. The Torah reader is reading. Right? Of course, the impulse for people to show off is a very human impulse, and it happens to this very day. Now we get into the question that Lynn brought up. If we're talking about haves and have-nots, whether it's education or whether it's economics, how do we try to deal with that reality? So here's the next Mishnah. The rich bring their first fruits to the temple in baskets of silver and gold. Right? So it's not mentioned in the Torah. The Torah just simply says a basket. But hey, if I'm a Kushner, am I just going to bring a regular basket? Are you kidding? If I can, make everybody else's jaw drop by my bringing the most amazing basket you ever saw, so I will. But the poor bring them in baskets made of peeled willow branches. Right? So they made these kind of wicker branches made out of the very cheap and abundant material. And both the baskets and the first fruits are given to the priests. Rabbi Shimon ben Nano says, the landowners may decorate the first fruits with any produce other than the 7 kinds of produce for which the land of Israel is noted: wheat, barley, grapes, figs, pomegranates, olives, and dates. Rabbi Akiva says they may not decorate the first fruits with any produce other than the 7 kinds of produce for which the land of Israel was noted. So here we have the sages letting people do what they want to do. Right? They did not make a rule that says, we're not going to do this. We're going to make it so that if you're rich, you have to do the same thing as the poor people. Lowest common denominator, everybody has to do willow wicker baskets. No, they let people afford what they could and choose their own aesthetic and their own way of decorating the basket, making the basket, what material it should be made out of. This is your brother-in-law, right? So you can unmute. What lesson did he try to derive from this?
Oh, he made some wisecrack about silver, and he was trying to explain that he made it sound like the wicker baskets was part of the text. But he did say that the interpretation of that was that the poor people had to leave the baskets and the rich people could take theirs with them. Yeah, so he was totally wrong. Sorry. It's confusing because I didn't know last night. I had a
family dynamic going on here.
I hadn't read the Parsha until today. So while he was talking, I just took everything he said at face value, and when I was reading through the Parsha, I thought I was missing something. I saw the one little thing about baskets, but he was trying to say that similar to what you were saying, he just didn't say it in a very, he said it differently, but that the rabbis were trying to provide equality between, somehow he made that sound like they were trying to provide equality for the poor.
So in general, that's very, very true. Here, I'm not seeing that they actually went to the same lengths that they did for other things. Mm. And that's something to think about. Did they feel that this is something that they, in the end, wanted to let people have some leeway in? Because it is about being thankful. And it's a little different than the grim reality that we have of burying our dead, where the alternative was that the poor, in their anguish at not being able to do the right thing, just walked away from it, and then somebody is suffering. The dead person was actually left to the public to take care of, which was a bizayon. It was a dishonoring of the dead. So in that case, they really intervened and they made sure that everybody was on the same page. Here, it's about letting people, encouraging people, actually commanding people to show their gratitude. So, do we stop people from showing their gratitude in an elaborate way? So apparently they decided, you know what, here we're not going to do that so much. Yeah, Sarita.
So this seems very consistent with how sacrifices in general are described, and it's something actually that I always like, because I'm remembering, it starts by, so you'll bring a cow, and the best cow, and then if you don't have enough money, then you'll do a bird, and if you can't afford it, then you'll do some grain, and so I actually always liked that, because they were all equally good, and there was this message, in some sense, that yeah, you should obviously try to bring something that's really meaningful, but sort of don't strap yourself, and no one should look down on you because this is what you can bring. So, right, Lou's commenting, it's like fair share dues, right? So
where did they get that idea from?
Yeah, yeah.
Yes, I think that you're right. So that we have this kind of graduated, whatever works for you, whatever you're capable of doing, and the point being, in the text it talks about that. Here it doesn't, just as basket, right? But in the text of the korbanot, in the sacrifices, as Sarita points out, that the allowance is made for saying, hey, you may not be able to afford an animal, you may not be able to afford this sacrifice. Guess what? Whatever you give for that sacrifice counts exactly the same, whether you're giving an expensive animal or you're giving a cup of flour. You've fulfilled your obligation to the 100%. So the Torah makes that very, very powerful point there. Here, it was more of a sociological development that happened. And what we see again is the bare bones of the text are expanded and elaborated so much by the practice of the people. Right? They have decided to make these into a parade. They decided to make their baskets beautiful. It doesn't say anything about any of that in the Torah itself. So this is what it means to embrace with joy the commandments that are given, and that's what the Torah actually says that God hopes for. I'm gonna just segue into that verse. We can look at other things if we want also, but I want to pick that out just to make this point. At the end of our Torah reading, toward the end, it's in, let me just, where is it? Yes, page 1154. So this is Deuteronomy 28, starting from verse 45. Somebody want to help us by reading this out loud? Who's got it? Deuteronomy 28, 45. If you have the Eitz Chaim, it's page 1154, middle of the page.
I have it in the JPS.
Same translation. Good. Thank you.
All these curses shall befall you. They shall pursue you and overtake you until you are wiped out, because you did not heed the Lord your God and keep the commandments and laws that he enjoined upon you, enjoined upon you. They shall serve as signs and proofs against you and your offspring for all time, because you would not serve the Lord your God in joy and gladness over the abundance of everything. You shall have to serve in hunger and in thirst, naked and lacking everything, the enemies whom the Lord will let loose against you. He will put an iron yoke upon your neck until he has wiped you out.
Sounds bad. But there's this kind of poetic justice, contrasting poetic justice that is meant to be discerned here, right? Because you didn't serve me, you're going to serve them, right? So there's that punishment. But in the middle of this description, we have what God says the expectation is, Tachat asher, this is verse 47. Tachat asher lo avadeta et Hashem Elokecha b'simcha uvetuv levav meirov kol. All because you did not serve the eternal, your almighty God, with joy and with good-heartedness from out of all the goodness that you were blessed with. This is why this is happening. You had so much goodness, and you could have been happy, and you could have used all of this abundance to open your own hearts, tuv levav, to be good-hearted. But you didn't do that. Now, again, the point is made already in verse 45, right? All these curses shall befall you. Why? Because you did not heed the Lord your God and keep the commandments, right? So that's the simplest thing, right? Follow God or else watch out. But then it goes beyond that. And it says, you know what the root of it is? The root of it is you didn't take joy in this. You didn't find excitement. You didn't find pleasure. And you didn't do it with an open heart, which connotes also sharing, extending to other people, joining together. That's exactly what we have in that description about the procession with Bikurim is simcha and tuv levav, joy and good-heartedness. And we're all coming together, and it's, we know from pilgrimage in anthropology, pilgrimages happen in every culture that there's people have to take a trek to get to some central shrine, some holy place. And of course, supposedly the point is to get there and to be there and then to do the ritual thing. But 99% of the experience is not the getting there. That's actually, the almost the anticlimax. The real joy of it is the going there. The real joy of it is the journey. This is what you have, what's it called? There's the Decameron, but there's an earlier one. What's the earlier one? Chaucer, right? The Tales of Chaucer. What's it called? Is that what it's called?
Canterbury Tales.
Canterbury, yeah.
Canterbury. So they're all on a pilgrimage to Canterbury, right? But the whole point of that is how they keep each other company, and they tell each other stories, and they laugh, and it's a little bit actually not so holy what they laugh about. There's a lot of off-color stuff going on, and it's all for the purpose of doing supposedly this very holy, sacred, thing. That's, you have to imagine, this is, even if you don't take that, kind of level of it, but the joy of everybody coming together to do this. We were talking earlier, giving away the confidential, pre-recorded stuff. We were talking about how wonderful the splash was, right? Where it was really nice to be able to connect up with people, to be able to see each other, to know that we were all doing the same thing in one way or another, whatever variations, but we were all in this together. So that's the simcha v'tuv levav. And God is saying, you can do it that way. And when you don't do it that way, that's when it's going to all fall apart. And then, you know what? Okay. So if that's what you don't want, then instead you'll become, grim, oppressed servants, because you didn't take the opportunity to be free celebrants as you serve God.
I find it really interesting that, you know, in most places it's just do this, it's what you do. And then, but in a few places in the Torah, your thoughts and your feelings as you do it are mentioned. And it doesn't come up a lot.
No, but it comes up mostly in the book of Devarim. It comes up mostly in the book of Deuteronomy. And as I pointed out many times, I don't think it's a coincidence that it comes up here, because this is the human document. This is the human voice, right? God is not us, and we are not God, despite the fact that we sometimes forget and think we are. But God is giving us all of this guidance. And now Moses is like, yelling and screaming, but also cajoling and pleading and trying to find a way. And also just, I've mentioned it many times, get to your heart. When we say, V'ahavta et Hashem Elokecha b'chol levavcha, love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your might, that's not anywhere else in the Torah. That's only here in Deuteronomy, this idea. You have a heart, use it. We have only we have a bunch of minutes, so let's see. But let's actually take a look then at very near the conclusion of the Torah reading. Let's turn to 1158. So this is chapter 29. And let's read the first three verses in chapter 29, please. Lynn, you got it? Go ahead.
Thanks for your patience. The first three. Moses summoned all Israel and said to them, "You have seen all that the Lord did before your very eyes in the land of Egypt, to Pharaoh and to all his courtiers and to his whole country. The wondrous feats that you saw with your own eyes, those prodigious signs and marvels. Yet to this day the Lord has not given you a mind to understand, or eyes to see, or ears to hear."
Right. So here we go again. As too many times, I have bemoaned the failure of this translation to do justice to the words, because the words are literally verse 3, and the Eternal has not given to you a heart, not a mind, a heart, leiv, ladat, so that you will intimately know, and eyes to see, and ears to hear, until this very day. Right? So that's that leiv again. The word leiv, the word heart, is found in the book of Deuteronomy many times over, more than in the whole rest of the Torah. So this is Moses as a heartfelt person who's about to die. In fact, the tradition says that this is actually, as I mentioned earlier, this is the pretty much the end. We have very, very short chapters that continue. The tradition says this was all done the last day of his life. This from this section on, and that's this very day. This very day is the very day that Moses will pass away. But what do we make? What sense can we make of in the last few minutes that we have when we read, starting from that you have seen all that the Lord did, right, before your very eyes, in the land of Egypt, Pharaoh, and the wondrous feats that you saw with your very own eyes, right? All of those miracles. Yet today, to this very day, or as I was translated, and yet God has not given you a heart to know intimately, eyes to see, and ears to hear, until this very day. So there's a little contradiction here, no? Certainly the eyes part, right? Your very eyes saw all that stuff. You haven't been given eyes to see until today. How do we make sense of that?
I just think Moses is saying it's not quite enough. There has to be more. And I've been trying to piece this together as you were talking. I can't remember if it was the songs that we sang the other night, the music, the Shomrei Nourish, or whether it was the Psalm of David, or whether it was both. But it was the asking, dear God, it's just one thing. I want to be in your house, and I want to be this, but then I want this, and then I want this. I mean, there were only three, but this reminds me of it in a sort of like an opposite mirror way, that God now is saying, it's not enough that you saw what I did. You have to go that next step, or those next steps. I don't know if that's crazy or.
It also seems like it's like people, you talk about hearing, listening, hearing but not really listening, right? So okay, it's there before your eyes, and yeah, you saw it, but it's like you didn't really get it. And so perhaps now, over this distance of time, for a different group of people, maybe now you can finally sort of get it and appreciate just how amazing it was. And yeah.
So on the one hand, they saw, right? But like you say, sometimes we see, but we don't see. After all, let's remember that the things that are mentioned here, the miracles with Pharaoh and Egypt and so on, actually happened 40 years ago, right? They happened to a generation that saw perfectly everything that was going on and never got the message in the end, right? When it came to the crunch, they ran away. They chickened out from everything that this was supposed to build up to. It's only now these people, this new generation, that's going to reap the harvest, right? They're the first fruits, right? They're the first fruits of all of this planting and cultivating of the Jewish people. They're going to go into the land, and the miracles that their parents saw, they saw it, but they didn't really see it. And maybe that's what we have the eyes mentioned again and again. You saw it, you saw it, you saw it, you saw all that stuff, right? But you didn't have the heart. You didn't take it to heart, right? You didn't go that one more step. Some people read it, V'lo natan Hashem lachem leiv ladat. God has not given you a heart to know this intimately, because God can't give it to you. Only you can do it. Your heart is in your hands, right? That's what is the critical question when we say, that we have free will. It's all about that idea. When we say love the Lord your God with all your heart, so the rabbi said, even with your bad heart, even with your bad inclination, right? Can you turn your heart around, right?
Well, that's what you were saying in your parsha, in your Devar Torah that you sent out. You said that about returning, that you're born with the goodness and you have to return to it as you fail.
If you will, and if you can, the question is, will you? And will you, meaning, will you have the will, right? Will you find that in your heart as something that you want to do? One commentary points out, what was this one day? What was this day? Why was so special about this day? And this commentary, it's the Meir Simcha Dvinsk, the Meir Chochma, a great teacher. He explains that he means this day of my death, Moses says. When Moses says, if you think it's all me, like I'm some kind of like superhuman being, and that's why I can do all this stuff, and I can talk to God, and I can, be close. You remember, no, you go, we can't go, you go. If you think there's something special about me, well, guess what? Today, I'm a dead man, just like everybody else. Nothing is going to save me from my mortality. I am just as much flesh and blood as the rest of you. So is it now clear to you that this is humanly possible? I'm not an angel. I'm not a demigod. I'm not some kind of like superhero. I'm just a person who overcame their own stumbling blocks, their own obstacles, their own proclivities, because I tried. So now it's up to you.
But also more than that, I mean, the people early, had asked Moshe to be the intermediary, right? It's just too overwhelming for us. So please, and now he's not going to be there. And so it's like, okay, I'm not here now to do that. You don't have an intermediary. You've got to do this on your own.
Right. Right. You could have, you could use me, until now as your crutch, but it's not going to be, I'm not going to be here anymore. Now it's really time to wake up, to grow up, to stand up and make your choice. All right. What?
How do we explain eyes, but God did not give us heart, eyes, and ears, the conflict of the eyes?
So that's what I think Sarita was suggesting. We see it, but did we really actually really see it? There's seeing and there's seeing. You can see the whole thing and just it never means anything to you. The first generation that saw those miracles eye to eye, the eyewitnesses, in the end it didn't move them enough. They didn't really take it in. They didn't see it enough for it to penetrate.
Yeah.
All right. Yasher koach, everybody.
Yasher koach. Thank you.
Thank you, Rabbi. Thank you, everybody. Have a good night.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Good night.